Right now, your mind may be drifting across a vast dark lake, your hands compulsively casting invisible nets of tension into the deep, hoping to snare a single moment of absolute stillness before it slips away. You are the weaver of nets that never hold, spent and hollowed out by the effort of trying to catch the flickering light of the moon. Convinced that if you could just construct the perfect mesh, if you could weave your worries, your plans, and your what-ifs into a trap tight enough, you would finally capture the piece that seems to ripple just beyond your reach. But every time you pull the rope, the water slides through the threads. The moon's reflection shatters into 1,000 useless fragments, and you are left sitting in a cold, motionless boat, holding only the frayed ends of a net that has caught nothing but the weight of your own desperate grasping. This rhythmic, exhausting cycle, this constant casting and hauling of nets made of expectation, has left you feeling as though you are losing the very happiness you are working so hard to secure. You are not broken for feeling this state of desperate searching. What you are experiencing is not a failure of character or a lack of spiritual discipline. It is the natural, inevitable result of trying to hold the ocean in a web of silk. Tonight, we will not try to force your mind to stop its casting, nor will we attempt to fix the net you have spent so long perfecting. We will gently explore how it feels to lay the heavy ropes down on the floorboards, to let the lake be exactly as it is, and to discover that the piece you have been hunting was never a fish to be landed, but the very water that has been holding you all along. Tonight, we will not try to solve the riddle of your emptiness. We will learn how to open your palms and trust the deep, quiet rhythm of the dark. The paradox of the weaver is that the more you struggle to catch your joy, the more you destroy its natural grace. You believe that your contentment is waiting at the end of the next cast, but the Buddhist insight is quite different. The peace you seek is not the harvest you haul into the boat. It is the wide, ungraspable expanse of the lake itself. You suffer not because you are unaccomplished, but because you are working so hard to net a reality that was never meant to be owned. Peace is not found by filling the boat. Peace is found when you stop trying to catch the present moment and start resting within the freedom of letting it go. Dear friend, if it feels right, take a slow, deep breath and let it out with a soft, settling sigh. There is no need for you to be anything other than a person resting after a long, weary day of casting into the dark. You do not have to solve the question of your future tonight. The silken ropes of your ambitions and your fears can sit where they are, and the water of your life can swirl as it pleases. Nothing is required of you right now. There is no catch to record, no quota to meet, and no distant master observing the contents of your boat. You are safe enough to soften. You are safe enough to admit that you are tired of the weaving, tired of the casting, and tired of the performance that keeps your heart fluttering in the quiet. Think of the net you have been weaving, the fine, knotted threads of your what-if thoughts, the way they tighten across your knuckles even when you are trying to relax, the way they pull your attention away from the stars above and toward the ripples below. Right now, in this quiet, dim space, there is no lake to conquer. You are not standing on the deck of a boat in the middle of a vast, demanding expanse trying to snare the moonlight. You are resting on a surface that is solid, stable, and completely supportive. Imagine your fingers uncurling, the grip loosening until the net spills from your lap, pooling into the dark corners of the floorboards where it can finally be still. Notice the way your palm immediately wants to open, the way your muscles finally surrender to the gravity of the room, no longer required to haul the weight of your own expectations. You might feel a strange, disorienting lightness, a sensation that you are somehow drifting because you are no longer anchored by the nets you convinced yourself were your lifeline. This is normal. When you have carried the need to catch your happiness for so long, the absence of that burden can feel like a loss of gravity. You may wonder, if I am not casting, if I am not watching for the ripple, who am I? But let that question hang in the air for a moment, like a stray thread floating on the breeze. You do not need to answer it. You do not need to assign a new title to this empty, quiet space. For tonight, it is enough to simply be the one who has stopped the hunt. Maybe you have felt this way before, standing at the edge of what you thought was a great, rushing demand to be sufficient, terrified that if you didn't invent a way to capture joy, you would be left with nothing but the silence of the night. You have knotted your threads, you have cast your lines, and you have sacrificed your rest to find a way to make your contentment stay, never realizing that the more you tried to net the light, the more trapped you felt. It is a lonely kind of labor, fishing for starlight in the dark, wondering if anyone else can see the prize you are trying to snare, or if they are all simply drifting with the current while you are struggling to pull. If it feels right, notice the temperature of the room. Is it soft, like the air after a summer dusk, or cool and wrapped in the safety of your own shelter? Just breathe into that sensation, allowing the air to move through your lungs with no agenda. You are not a fisherman in a hurry. You are a person who has finally stopped the casting. There is no deadline for this practice, and there is no catch that must be brought to shore before the morning comes. Everything you are worried about, the feeling of being empty-handed, the fear that you haven't secured a life that is enough, the phantom pressure to keep checking the water can be left on the dock for now. We are going to walk through the story of a fisherman who spent his life attempting to snare the moon's reflection in a golden net, and we will see what happened when he finally let the ropes go and looked at the water without the need to possess it. But for now, you don't even need to listen to the narrative. You don't need to analyze the metaphor or look for the lesson. You only need to exist here, in the quiet. As your body becomes heavy, your breath becomes rhythm, and the urgency of your catch begins to lose its grip on your heart. You are not a vessel that needs to be filled. You are not a fisherman that needs to be proven. You are a living, breathing being who deserves the simple, profound grace of doing absolutely nothing at all. Notice the thoughts that try to pull you back to the net. I should be more productive, or if I don't stay vigilant, I will fail thoughts. Do not try to fight them, just acknowledge them, as if they were tiny ripples on the surface of the lake, appearing, shimmering, and vanishing into the vast dark expanse. You do not need to be annoyed with your mind for being so busy. It has been trained to be a weaver for a long, long time. Just offer it the same kindness you would offer a guest who has arrived at your door after a long, difficult journey. You can acknowledge the urge to grasp, and then you can gently let it subside, returning your attention to the feeling of your weight against the bed, the feeling of the linens against your skin, the feeling of being completely, utterly at rest. It is a radical act, this stopping. It is the beginning of everything. By choosing not to cast, you are finally allowing yourself to be the lake you were born to be. You are no longer trying to bridge the gap between who you are and a harvest you can never hold. You are right here, and right here, there is no net. There is only the depth, the night, and the slow, deep, unending permission to finally be still. You have arrived, dear friend, not by filling your boat, but by finally letting go of the need to be the one who catches the light. Take another breath, let the shoulders sink even further, and let the knots of your efforts dissolve into the quiet, welcoming dark of the room. In a region where the geography was defined by a vast, upside-down dark lake, there lived a fisherman named Kalen. This lake was known for its stillness, a surface so smooth it acted as a perfect mirror for the sprawling starfields above. Kalen had spent his entire life upon these waters, but he had never truly looked at the lake as a place of rest to him. The water was a promise of a harvest he had yet to secure. He possessed a single, meticulously crafted fishing net, woven from the finest silk threads he could acquire, knotted with painstaking precision, and weighted with small, polished river stones. Kalen's life was consumed by a singular, frantic ambition. He believed that somewhere in the deepest, blackest center of the lake, there existed a school of starlight fish, radiant, fleeting creatures that he felt would finally prove his worth, silence his inner critics, and provide the sense of security he had chased since childhood. Every evening, as the moon began to climb, Kalen would row his narrow cedar boat to the middle of the expanse. The air would grow cold, smelling of deep, undisturbed water and pine needles from the distant shore. He would stand at the prow, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight, and he would cast his silk net in a wide, shimmering arc. He watched the white knots vanish into the black surface with the intensity of a man trying to snare the very breath of life. He would wait for the tug, the resistance, the confirmation that his effort had yielded something tangible. Yet night after night, the net would break the surface of the dark lake empty, dripping with nothing but water and the chill of the deep. Kalen was not a lazy man. His hands were calloused, his back was bent from the constant hauling, and his mind was a tangled knot of self-reproach. He often sat in the middle of the dark, staring at the empty mesh, wondering what he was doing wrong. He reknotted the threads when they frayed. He added more stones to the edges to make it sink faster. He rehearsed the way he cast, critiquing the angle of his elbow, the speed of his release, the timing of his pull. He was convinced that his empty boat was a personal failure, a testament to his own lack of focus. He feared that if he didn't catch the light soon, the lake would swallow his name entirely. One night, the mist rolled in a thick silver shroud that erased the horizon and turned the world into a small floating circle of presence. Kalen was exhausted, his arms burned, and his heart felt as hollow as the boat. As he prepared to cast his net once more, a small, flat-bottomed craft drifted out of the fog. It was steered by a silent, elderly boatman who used no oars but simply nudged the water with a long, unpolished pole. The boatman did not cast any lines. He did not watch the depths with hungry eyes. He simply sat on a woven mat, his hands resting quietly in his lap, letting the slow, rhythmic currents dictate the path of his journey. Kalen felt a surge of irritation at the sight of him. "How can you expect to catch anything?" he called out, his voice sharp and brittle, echoing across the silent water. "You aren't even watching the surface, you are just drifting." The old boatman stopped his pole and allowed his craft to nudge alongside Kalen's. He looked at the fisherman not with judgment, but with a gaze that seemed to see past the nets and the calluses. He looked down at the silk net lying in a heap on Kalen's boat, its intricate knots glowing faintly in the moonlight. "You are trying to catch the moon's reflection," the boatman said, his voice as steady as the tide. "You have been pulling so hard on these strings that you have forgotten that the moon is not in the water. The water is only showing you the moon. Why do you try to catch what is already above you?" Kalen stared at the net. He looked at the way the silk shimmered with the trapped light of the stars, a beautiful, useless burden. "If I don't catch it," he whispered, the panic rising in his chest, "then all of this, the nights, the cold, the waiting, it means nothing. I have to land something. I have to be someone who has caught the light." The boatman reached into his own empty, dry boat and pulled out a small, simple wooden cup, a vessel that had no lid, no trap, and no silk mesh to hold anything back. He dipped it gently into the water, letting the lake fill it, and then held it up for Kalen to see. The cup caught the reflection of the moon, held it for a brief, shivering second, and then tilted, letting the water pour back into the lake. "You see," the boatman said, "the cup does not need to catch the moon to be part of the moon's light. It only needs to be empty enough to receive what is already there. You have been fighting the water because you want to be the owner of the reflection. But you are not the fisherman of the stars, Kalen. You are the lake itself, and the lake does not need to cast a net to hold the sky." Kalen looked at the net in his lap. He realized with a sudden sinking weight that the net had never been a tool of harvest. It had been a cage for his own anxiety. Every knot he had tied was a layer of fear, a belief that his worth was something that had to be hunted, captured, and dragged into the boat to be validated. He had been so busy managing the weave of his expectations that he had never once felt the temperature of the water, the texture of the cool night air, or the profound, silent support of the lake beneath his keel. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of a truth he had spent a lifetime running from. The boatman did not wait for a response. He simply eased his pole back into the current and drifted back into the silver fog, his presence leaving a wake that slowly, gently, merged with the stillness of the lake. Kalen did not throw his net away immediately. The habit of the hunter was too deep in his marrow. But he did something he had never done. He set the net down, not on the boat's damp floor, but on the small wooden seat beside him. He opened his hands, the same hands that had gripped the ropes, until the skin broke, and he placed them flat against the cold wood of the boat's edge. He looked at the water, really looked at it for the first time. He saw the way the surface rippled when he breathed. He saw how the stars didn't just sit above him, but danced within the depths of the black water, moving freely, uncaptured and uncaged. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to dissipate, a long, slow unwinding that made his body feel heavy and real. He wasn't catching the light. but he was holding it. He wasn't landing the harvest, but he was part of the harvest. He sat there, a man in a small boat on a vast, dark lake, and for the first time he realized that he was not losing anything. He was simply stopping the chase, and in the quiet of the night, that was finally enough. The boat swayed in the dark. The water whispered against the cedar hull, and Kalen felt the first, faint, and terrifyingly beautiful sensation of being truly, unconditionally at home. The net was still there, but the fisherman was no longer the servant of the catch. He was simply a part of the vast, breathing expanse, waiting for the morning to show him whatever it chose to reveal. The way Kalen stood upon the deck of that narrow boat, his fingers raw and white-knuckled against the silk of his net, reveals the silent, exhausting architecture of your own internal struggle. You have likely spent a great deal of your time feeling as though you are currently in a period of intense waiting, a dark, rippling stretch of uncertainty that must be mastered, netted, and hauled into the light before you can finally allow yourself to be at peace. You look at your days, your struggles, and your present circumstances, and you see them as a harvest that must be earned, a school of starlight fish that needs to be disciplined by the strength of your own hands. You carry the heavy, knotted silk of your self-criticism, your ambition, and your fear of change, convinced that until you catch the right outcome, secure the right approval, or arrive at the right state of being, you are fundamentally empty-handed. But this very effort, this desperate, constant attempt to snag the fleeting reflection of your own life, is what keeps you shivering in the mist, perpetually tired and perpetually dissatisfied. This story is not suggesting that you should abandon your goals or lose the capacity for passion. It does not ask you to become a person who moves through the world without desire, nor does it suggest that you should turn away from the reality of your ambitions. It is simply inviting you to look at the difference between casting a net to possess the moon and letting your boat drift on the surface that holds it. For as long as you can remember, you have been trying to manage your own happiness, treating each moment like a harvest that needs to be captured, tied, and kept in a secure compartment within your boat. You have been looking at the flow of your life and seeing only a series of missed catches, fearing that if you stopped watching the water for a single heartbeat, you would lose your purpose, drift off course, or be forgotten by the very world you are trying to impress. Buddhist wisdom suggests that this frantic weaving is the source of a deeper, more hollow fatigue than any external difficulty could ever produce. There is a profound distinction between the first touch of life, the reality of being in a situation that is fluid, the reality of change, or the reality of finding yourself in the middle of a vast, dark lake, and the second touch, which is the internal reaction we add on top. The first touch is what life presents to you. It is the inevitable reality of being a human creature on a lake, where the light is always shifting. This first touch is not something you can control. It is simply the terrain of being alive. But the second touch, the one that keeps you gripping the silk ropes until your palms ache, is the layer of resistance, judgment, and fear your mind adds to the first. You add the second touch when you convince yourself that the fluidity of your own nature is a failing, rather than a natural quality of being. You add it when you label your current state as lacking or unproductive, rather than your actual, authentic existence. That internal struggle, the constant, frantic effort to snag a reflection that is meant to move, is the source of your deepest, most persistent weariness. It is not the lake that has exhausted you. It is the weight of the net you have been hauling in the belief that your present self is insufficient. You are trying to catch the portrait of a starlight fish into the heart of the dark, never realizing that the water itself is the only truth. When we speak of attachment, we are not talking about your capacity to love or your commitment to the things you care about. We are talking about the way the mind turns the present moment into a target it must conquer. You demand that life be predictable, that your joy be consistent, and that you be free of any internal restlessness. When you demand this, you are effectively trying to prevent yourself from ever truly being human. The more force you use to cast the net, the more you suffer, because you are denying the truth that you are already part of the lake. You are living as if the person you want to be is hiding in the depths, forever just one more cast away, while the person you actually are is being rocked by the water. waiting for you to notice the beauty of the surface. Impermanence, the teaching that all things are shifting, is often misunderstood as a reason to be afraid. We see the ripples moving, and we see the possibility of losing our grip on the things we love. But the insight of the boatman is that the lake is not a challenge. It is a pulse. It is part of the world's own breathing. The reality is that there is no finished harvest where everything will finally be stilled and solved. There is only the continuous changing process of the drifting. If you refuse to inhabit the present as it is, you are not saving yourself from the loss of light. You are merely ensuring that you remain separate from the very thing that is trying to hold you. You are choosing a permanent, exhausting battle over the risk of being a person who is simply floating within the world. Letting go is not an act of surrender to the void. It is the act of setting the ropes down. It is the realization that the lake is already strong enough to carry your weight, and that the stars were never yours to catch. When you stop trying to snare the moonlight, you are not becoming less. You are finally becoming present. You are finally allowing your hands to rest, to feel the texture of the cool night air, and to realize that you are already part of the life you have been trying so hard to capture. When you stop trying to catch your happiness, you finally have the energy to inhabit it. You are no longer a hunter who is just passing through. You are a part of the water, and the rhythm of the ripples is finally, mercifully, your own. Mindfulness is simply the ability to notice the net in your hands. It is the gentle awareness that says, I am reaching for the silk again. I am preparing to cast because I am afraid that if I stop, I will vanish. You do not need to scold yourself for that impulse. You do not need to turn that realization into another reason to feel ashamed. You only need to notice it. You only need to see that you are carrying a weight meant for a project that has instead become a barrier to your own stillness. Awareness gives you the space to lay the silk aside. Just as Kalen finally set his net on the bench of his boat, knowing he did not have to conquer the lake to be worthy of standing upon it. Compassion in this light is the tenderness you show toward your own need to be successful. It is the ability to look at your history, the moments where you felt you had to prove your worth, the places where you felt you were drifting and lost, the times you felt you had to force an outcome to be safe, and to see them as the history of a weaver who was simply afraid of the dark. You don't have to pretend you were never afraid. You don't have to act as if you were always at peace. You only need to recognize that your history is the very thing that gives your present depth, its texture, and its capacity to offer you the rest you have earned. You have spent so much energy trying to be the perfect hunter of your own contentment, believing that if you were just successful enough, you would finally be granted a sense of belonging. But the peace you are looking for is not found in the weight of the net. It is found in the ability to move through the lake without needing to own the reflection. You don't have to be the most productive person on the water. You don't have to be a fisher who never misses a strike. You only have to be a person who is finally willing to let the silk go, trusting that if you step into the flow, the water will be there to hold you, and that the water is enough. Think of the silence that has filled your life, not the peaceful, restorative silence of deep rest, but the tense, guarded silence of a life being held back, waiting for a harvest that is always one more cast away. You have been waiting for the water to stop moving, waiting for the net to be full, waiting for a permission that can only ever come from your own hand. You have been afraid that if you stood still, you would be lost, or worse, that you would realize the lake was never an enemy. But the vast, dark space you fear is actually the home where your life lives. It is the open expanse that gives your existence its freedom. You are not a vessel that needs to be filled. You are a part of the water that is already whole. You don't need to finish the harvest tonight. You don't need to cast another line or mend another knot. That is a task for the daylight, if it ever feels like a task you choose. But tonight the work is much smaller and much more profound. It is simply the task of allowing the silk to stay on the bench. It is the task of feeling the cool, quiet air against the shoulders you have held so rigid, knowing that you are safe in this state of letting go. You are not required to do anything. You are not required to be anything. You are simply a traveler, resting in the middle of the lake, existing without the need to claim the stars. Notice how the room feels as you contemplate this. The edges of your concern are softening, becoming less like the taut ropes of a net and more like the gentle, rolling movement of the dark water. You have held your breath for so long, trying to keep your life contained, that you may have forgotten how good it feels to simply let the air move in and out of your body. You are not losing your identity by relaxing. You are finally letting your existence settle into its own natural, comfortable form. You are not a container that needs to be defended. You are a presence that is allowed to simply occupy this space, supported by the floor, held by the quiet, and warmed by the slow, steady rhythm of your own heart. But there was still a deeper, quieter truth to be found in the fog, and the student who had walked all the way to the lake to capture the beauty of the butterfly was about to discover that the web she was trying to spin was merely an echo of her own fear, while her open palms were the sanctuary she had forgotten how to hold. Right now, as you rest in the soft dimness of this evening, let us translate the quiet peace of that lake into the immediate pulsing landscape of your own body and mind. There is no need to change your posture with a sense of rigid correctness, nor are you required to achieve a state of perfect, unmoving stillness. We are not here to build a temple of flawless meditation tonight. We are simply creating a small, sheltered space where you are allowed to step out of the frantic current of your own grasping. If it feels right, allow your eyes to close softly, letting the outer world blur into a distant, gentle hum, much like the sound of water lapping against the wooden hull of a boat far from shore. Take a slow, unhurried breath in, feeling the cool air travel through your chest, and then let it go with a long, soft exhale. You do not need to force your breathing to follow a specific pattern or a deep, unnatural rhythm. Let your breath be exactly as it is, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, always moving like the tide in a quiet bay, without any need for your mind to govern its direction. With each release of air, imagine that you are allowing the mist of the day's frantic effort to simply drift away from your face, leaving your skin cool and your awareness spacious. Bring your attention down into your hands, specifically into the palms that have spent the last 14 hours casting invisible nets into the future, hoping to snare a sense of security that always slips away. Perhaps you can feel a subtle, lingering tightness there, a phantom memory of the silken ropes you have been weaving to trap your own happiness. If it feels right, let your fingers uncurl completely. Let them spread wide for a brief moment against the surface of your bed, and then allow them to soften into their own natural slight curve. There is no line to cast right now. There is no moonlight to trap in a mesh. Your hands are permitted to be empty, soft, and entirely off-duty. As your palms soften, notice how that wave of relaxation can travel slowly up through your wrists, into your forearms, and settle into your shoulders. The shoulders are often the place where we carry the weight of our entire harvest, the pressure to be successful, the fear of coming up empty-handed, the exhausting effort of maintaining a boat that never stops seeking. Let those shoulders drop down toward the mattress, letting go of the coiling tension that has held them high for so long. You do not have to carry the burden of your own contentment tonight. You can simply be a collection of soft muscles, quiet skin, and steady warmth, entirely supported by the surface beneath you. Now, let your awareness drift into the space behind your eyes, into the quiet theater of your mind where your thoughts have been casting lines into the dark. Notice one specific thought or worry that has been demanding your attention over the last few hours. Perhaps it is a memory of an interaction that felt insufficient, a fear that you are falling behind in the timeline you set for yourself, or an anxious calculation about a decision you must make next week. Do not try to push this thought away from your awareness. Do not try to argue with it, fix it, or pretend that you are too enlightened to feel it. Even noticing its presence is enough. Give this mental pattern a gentle, silent name within your heart. You might call it the hunter's habit, or the fear of an empty boat. By naming it, you are stepping back from the work. You are no longer the one casting the net. You are the one sitting on the bench, watching the water. Look at the texture of this worry. If it had a physical weight, it might feel exactly like that finely knotted silk net Kalen held in his trembling hands. It feels dense, intricate, and demanding of your physical energy. In your imagination, if it feels comfortable, Picture yourself holding this silken net out over the edge of the quiet boat. You do not have to throw it with violence or anger. You only need to relax the muscles of your grip. See the fingers opening one by one. Watch the intricate, weighted mesh slip from your palm, falling slowly through the air until it lands with a soft, quiet splash in the dark, still water beside the boat. Watch what happens to the net when it is no longer being pulled by your effort. It does not explode, it does not cause the lake to fall. It simply sinks into the cool depths, the knots loosening as the water rushes through the silk, and the moonlight begins to filter through the empty threads. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal, and as the weight drops away, the space inside you begins to widen for what comes next. Notice the strange, beautiful transformation that happens when you stop feeding the thought with your resistance. The worry, which felt like a solid catch you were trying to land, begins to lose its hard outline. It becomes like the reflection of a star in the water, something beautiful to look at, but not something you are meant to possess. The water doesn't fight the reflection, it simply lets the star dance upon its surface, smoothing out the tension, until the worry gently dissolves into the vastness, turning into part of the lake's own dark, rich floor. The thought is no longer a command, it is just an event that has passed through your awareness and washed into the deep. There is no need to force this image to be perfect or to feel an immediate, magical healing inside your chest. If the mind reaches back out to pick up the net, if the worry returns with a loud, demanding voice, do not interpret this as a failure of your meditation. The habit of the cast is deeply etched into your nervous system, and it takes time for the hands to remember how to remain open. Simply notice that the fingers have closed again. Offer yourself a moment of deep, uncritical tenderness, and repeat the release. You can return to this open palm whenever you are ready, over and over, throughout the night. Let your awareness return now to the immediate physical reality of the room around you. Feel the gentle pressure of the pillow beneath your head, the texture of the fabric against your cheek, the way the night air moves across any exposed skin. You are completely safe here within the borders of this quiet evening. Nothing is chasing you across the dark. No master boatman is judging the size of your catch. You do not have to capture a perfect life before you are allowed to sleep. The lake of your existence is flowing perfectly well without your constant casting, carrying you through the dark toward a morning that will arrive in its own time. Let your jaw relax completely, letting a small space open between your teeth. Let the skin of your forehead smooth out, dissolving the lines of concentration that you have worn like armor all day. You are not a fisherman that must prove your value through a harvest. You are a living, breathing person who is allowed to change, to drift and to rest without having earned it through performance. You can let the lake be wild tonight, and you can let yourself be small on its surface, wrapped in the deep, unbothered comfort of doing absolutely nothing. As you stay with this slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your chest, you might feel a deep sense of returning home, not to a harbor you had to reach by netting the stars, but to the simple, quiet awareness that has been waiting for you beneath all the noise of your seeking. You are here. You are breathing. You are allowed to be empty-handed. And as the darkness grows heavier and more comforting around you, we are ready to move deeper into the center of the lake, where a second story will show us how the young student finally learned the difference between the beauty she wanted to trap in a web and the freedom of allowing that beauty to simply be. High above the dark, mirroring lake, near the headwaters where the streams first gathered their strength, there lived a young apprentice named Ilara. She had come to the mountain retreat with a desperate, hidden hunger. She believed that if she could learn to trap the ephemeral beauty of the world, the fleeting sunset, the grace of a passing bird, the brief spark of a moment of true clarity, she would finally possess a permanent proof of her own goodness. She spent her days in the high meadows, fashioning intricate, delicate webs from the silk of mountain spiders and the fibers of dried grasses. She believed that if she could create a web strong enough, beautiful enough, and precise enough, she could snare the wandering spirits of joy and keep them forever, safe from the changing seasons and the slow, inevitable fading of the light. Her teacher was an old woman who lived in a hut constructed entirely of unworked cedar. a structure that allowed the wind to pass through its walls without resistance. This teacher never spoke of nets or webs. She spent her hours simply watching the mountain fog roll through the pines or listening to the way the stream struck the stones. Alara, however, was restless. She would return to her teacher's hut each evening, her fingers stained by the sap of the grasses, her hair tangled with the remnants of her failed webs, and she would weep. She spoke of her exhaustion, how she felt that her entire life was a frantic, losing race against the vanishing of things. She described the ache in her chest that told her if she couldn't prove she had captured happiness, she would eventually be left with nothing but her own insignificance. The teacher listened, her face as composed and weathered as the mountain slate. One afternoon, after watching Alara labor for hours over a complex web intended to trap a patch of golden, late-afternoon sunlight, the teacher finally moved. She walked over to the meadow and knelt beside the young woman. She did not look at the web. She pointed to a butterfly, a creature of iridescent, trembling violet that had landed on a nearby thistle. It was a rare, startlingly beautiful sight, and it rested there for only a breath, its wings pulsating with the rhythm of the mountain air. Alara's instincts flared. She reached for her web, her hands shaking with the urge to contain, to hold, to fix that beauty before it could fly away. Her fingers tightened on the coarse grass. Her breath caught in her throat, and for one agonizing second, she was ready to tear the thistle apart just to keep the wings within her reach. But before she could move, the teacher placed a firm, cooling hand over Alara's, pressing her palm gently against the earth. "If you close your fingers," the teacher whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the meadow, "you will only have the dust of wings. If you let it be, you have the butterfly." Alara froze. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Like a trapped bird, she felt the ancient, panic need to secure, to own, to be the one who could say, "I have this." She was terrified that if she didn't grab, the beauty would simply dissolve into the ether, and she would be forced to admit that she was not the owner of the world's grace. But the weight of the teacher's hand, the grounding coolness of the earth beneath her knees, and the raw, stinging realization that her web was already beginning to fray in the wind stopped her. She took a shuddering, ragged breath. She let her fingers unclench. She allowed the hand that had been poised to strike to lie flat and empty on the soil. The butterfly, unbothered, remained for a few heartbeats longer, its wings a blur of violet light against the darkening sky. And then, with a sudden, effortless flick, it took to the air, rising up into the vast, open blue of the mountain peak. It did not belong to Alara. It did not leave a debt behind. It simply moved through the meadow, and in that movement, it was more beautiful than any web could ever capture. Alara watched it go, and for the first time she felt a profound, quiet shift in her center. The panic didn't vanish, it was still there, a thin, sharp thread of old fear. But she didn't follow it. She didn't reach. She didn't blame herself for the urge to grasp. She simply sat there, feeling the wind against her skin. And for the first time, she understood that the beauty was not in the holding. The beauty was in the freedom of the flight. Transformation did not come to Alara in a thunderclap of total enlightenment. She did not wake up the next morning as a saint who was immune to the reach of desire. She still woke up with the feeling of emptiness. She still felt the familiar, twitching urge to check her progress, to weave a new web, to make sure she was getting somewhere. But the shift was in the breath that preceded the action. When the urge to weave arrived, she would pause. She would notice the tightening in her jaw, the way her eyes darted around the meadow, looking for something to snare, and she would gently place her hand on her chest. She would acknowledge the fear. "I am afraid of disappearing if I don't catch something," and she would breathe into it, letting the fear exist without letting it dictate her hands. She began to choose small, deliberate acts of release. She would go to her stash of silken threads, and instead of mending them, she would walk to the edge of the stream and let them drift away on the current, watching the white fibers tangle and disappear into the white water. It was a terrifying, exhilarating act of rebellion against her own internal demands. She stopped trying to be the weaver of the world's light and started to be the witness of its passing. She found that by not catching the light, she was finally able to sit in it, She found that the emptiness she had spent her life trying to weave away was not a flaw, it was a space, a clear, vast, and honest space that allowed the mountain, the river, and the butterfly to exist in their own right, without requiring her permission or her protection. There was no magical perfection here, just a subtle, persistent grace. When she failed, when she felt the old panic rise and saw herself reach out to grab at a fleeting moment of peace, she didn't turn away from herself in disgust. She didn't replay the mistake for hours in the dark, weaving a web of self-recrimination. She simply caught herself, offered a moment of quiet, compassionate space, and returned to the present. She learned to sit with the uncertainty of the mountain night, acknowledging that she had no net to shield her from the passing of time, and discovering that, surprisingly, the night was not trying to hurt her. It was only trying to hold her. In this way, the apprentice became a part of the mountain's own rhythm. She was no longer a stranger attempting to trap the light. She was the light reflecting on the surface of the meadow, moving, changing, and vanishing. Always safe because she never belonged to the web in the first place. The teaching was no longer a thing she had to catch, it was the atmosphere she had finally learned how to breathe. The suffering that once felt like a solid wall had become as permeable as the mist, and Alara, in her quiet, unperfect way, found that she had everything she needed, not because she had succeeded in gathering it all, but because she had finally stopped fighting the fact that she was here, watching the butterfly fly, empty-handed and completely, deeply at peace. Slowly, the teaching becomes personal, and as we look at the remnants of your own nets, we begin to see that the emptiness you have been running from is the exact shape of your freedom. The way Alara sat by the stream, her hands finally quiet and empty, reveals the hidden, abrasive architecture of your own internal struggle. You have spent your life believing that if you were not actively spinning new webs, if you were not perpetually engaged in the capture and containment of your own happiness, you would be lost to the drifting currents of existence. This belief is a heavy, frantic kind of labor. It forces you to live in a state of chronic vigilance, where every unexpected shift in your circumstances is scanned for failure, and every moment of spontaneous joy is treated like a prize that must be secured before it vanishes. You have been treating the vast lake of your life like a hunting ground that demands constant, grueling maintenance, convinced that if you stop weaving, if you stop bracing against the emptiness, your entire identity will dissolve into a formless, forgettable void. But this very effort, this obsessive muscular need to snare the passing light of your own experience is the primary source of the exhaustion that settles into your marrow when the house finally goes quiet. Consider the delicate, almost invisible mechanism of your own distress. When you encounter a situation that challenges your sense of order, perhaps a sudden shift in your professional standing, a relationship that feels less secure than you desire, or a persistent awareness that you are not where you thought you would be by now, this is the first touch of life. It is the raw, unadorned reality of being human in a world that refuses to hold a static shape. It is the sudden increase in the wind, or the sensation of finding yourself drifting in the center of the dark without a net to steady your footing. This first touch is unavoidable. It is simply the friction of having a heart that beats in rhythm with a changing, untamable world. But the second touch, the one that keeps you pacing your inner halls in the deep of the night, is something entirely different. It is the layer of judgment, panic, and fierce, unyielding resistance your mind pours over the first touch, as if you could rewrite the lake's geometry through the sheer force of your own apprehension. You add this second wound when you declare that the current state of your life is an unacceptable mistake rather than a place of existence. You add it when you label your uncertainty as a void that must be filled, or when you look at the surface of the dark water and see only a sign of your own inadequacy. That internal struggle, the constant, frantic effort to snare a reflection that is meant to move, is the source of your deepest, most persistent weariness. It is not the lake that has exhausted you. It is the weight of the silk you have been hauling in the belief that your present self is insufficient. You are trying to catch the portrait of a starlight fish into the heart of the dark, never realizing that the water itself is the only truth. When you attempt to fix your self-worth through the lens of shame, You are essentially trying to build a cage out of your own desire. You use the tools of your own insecurity, rehearsing future disasters, replaying past errors, seeking constant approval from a world that doesn't hold the blueprint for your soul, and you wonder why the capture never holds its luster. But you cannot create a sense of belonging through the energy of pursuit. When you judge yourself for being unsettled, you only create more tension. When you judge yourself for not yet having become a finished, secured person, you only add a layer of bitterness to the experience of being. This is why you feel like you are chasing a ghost that always slips through your fingers. You are trying to resolve the restlessness of the heart by using the restlessness of the mind as your primary instrument, never realizing that the instrument itself is what keeps you tethered to the boat. The wisdom offered here is not that you should cease your efforts or abandon your dreams. It is that you should stop treating every moment of transition as a failure of your own design. When a thought of being unfinished arises, you don't have to turn it into an identity. You don't have to become the weaver. You can simply observe the thought as the fog passing through the trees. You can look at it and acknowledge there is the sensation of wanting to be further ahead, or there is a fear that I am falling apart. And then you can choose not to pick up the heavy, tangled silk of self-judgment. You can choose not to invest your precious, limited energy into the story that your anxiety is trying to sell you. You can let the sound of that worry ripple out and fade, just as Alara let the mountain stream wash away the white fibers of her failed webs. Peace is not the state where the water is perfectly stilled, and every uncertainty has been dismantled into a solid, unchanging form. Peace is the state where you are no longer at war with the fact that the path is swirling, that the destination is shifting, and that you are allowed to be in the middle of it. It is a different relationship with the reality of your own life. When you encounter a moment of deep uncertainty, you no longer see it as a breach of your perimeter. You see it as a mark of your own resilience. You no longer see your vulnerability as a personal defect. You see it as the space where the present moment can finally take root, because you are not adding that second layer of resistance. The energy of the emotion does not get stuck. It moves, it flows, and it dissipates on its own, leaving your heart clear once more to hear the quiet, steady rhythm of the water against the hull. You have turned your pain into an identity because it felt like the only way to make sense of your experience. If you are the person who is always hunting for peace, then at least you have a name for the restless ache in your chest. But this identity is a net that never gets put down. It locks you into a narrative that requires you to stay on guard, to keep weaving, to keep explaining your worth to the wind. Tonight you are invited to set that identity down. You are not your harvest. You are the lake in which the harvest floats. You are not your past errors. You are the one who has finally let go of the line. You are not your anxiety. You are the vast, open expanse that is capable of noticing the turbulence without being consumed by the fear of the dark. The fear of uncertainty is perhaps the deepest layer of this cage. You cling to the hope that if you can just predict what is coming by netting it securely, you will be safe. But the future is never as rigid as your fears pretend. It is fluid, it is open, and it is precisely because it is uncertain that it holds the possibility for genuine connection, for new patterns, and for unexpected moments of beauty. Your desire for total control over your security is actually a refusal to participate in the life that is unfolding right in front of you. It is a refusal to let the water touch your skin. And in that refusal, you are missing the very thing that makes the lake a sanctuary. When you notice yourself rehearsing the future, gently ask yourself, am I trying to solve a problem that exists right now? Or am I trying to control a possibility that hasn't happened? Most often, you will find that you are agonizing over a fish that exists only in your imagination. You are trying to snare a reflection in a rush of water by returning your attention to the simple, physical reality of your breath or the feeling of your body against the bed. You are stepping out of the loop of expectation and back into the sanctuary of the present. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to be uncertain. You are allowed to be a person who is still learning how to drift within the stream. There is no requirement for you to be a finished, perfectly bounded success by the time the sun rises. You are exactly where you need to be. which is in the middle of a process of transformation. The fact that you can recognize your own tendency to snare. The fact that you can witness the second wound as it begins to form. This is evidence of your awakening. Compassion is the bridge that takes you from the second pain back to yourself. It is the ability to look at the tired, weaving, and worried parts of you and offer them the same grace you would offer a traveler who has been carrying a heavy load for miles. You don't tell the traveler they are a failure for being exhausted. You help them set the net down so they can finally rest their hands. You can do the same for yourself. You can place your hand on your heart and acknowledge, this is difficult. I am tired of trying to net my own security, and it is okay to let the line remain loose for tonight. This is not giving up. This is wisdom. This is the recognition that your strength was never found in the weight of the harvest you could haul, but in the honesty of your open heart. As you lie here, feel the space around you. Notice how the room holds you, how the darkness does not ask anything of you, and how the silence is not a void but a container for your rest. You have spent your energy trying to construct a safety that can never exist in the way you imagined. The true safety is in the realization that you do not need to catch the stars. The stars are held by the sky, by gravity, and by the natural, unfolding rhythm of the world itself. You are part of that whole, and you are finally, mercifully, invited to simply rest as a participant rather than a hunter. You can stop snagging, you can stop casting, you can finally just be. You can let the silk stay on the bench, and you can let yourself drift into the quiet, welcoming dark. The discipline of setting down the silken net, of realizing that the lake you have been trying to harvest is already the very ground upon which you stand, is not a practice reserved for the high, mountain-shrouded reaches where the young apprentice learned to watch the butterfly. It is a vital, breathing art that belongs to the rush and the noise of your ordinary modern days. You may notice that the urge to cast to snare a sense of security in a relationship, to fix a perceived mistake in your timeline, or to construct a rigid identity so that you can feel safe from the drifting nature of time arises most acutely in the small, seemingly mundane moments of your life. It appears when the screen of your phone glows in the dark, while you wait for a validation that feels like a verdict on your worth, or when you lie awake at night, the silence of your room magnifying every awkward phrase from the day, compelling you to cast for an answer. As if by replaying the sequence you could somehow turn a stumble into a graceful, permanent pose. In these instances you are not failing to be awake or aware. You are simply encountering the rugged, steep, and shadowed terrain of your own existence. When you find yourself lying awake at night, the silence of your room magnifying every thought of the day's perceived errors, notice the way your mind immediately looks for the silk. You feel the need to cast, to haul the heavy weight of regret, to justify or to disappear behind a wall of explanations. But this is where the wisdom of the lake becomes your most practical companion. You do not have to craft a new capture. You do not have to resolve the turbulence or force a state of calm. You can simply be the traveler who has decided to step away from the edge of the boat's prow. You can acknowledge the hum of the internal casting without needing to turn it into a harvest that alerts the rest of your nervous system to a danger that isn't present. Peace is practiced in these small, unglamorous moments of restraint. The next time you find yourself about to react from a place of insecurity, pause. Take one single breath before your fingers touch the screen or your voice fills the air. Let that breath be the space between the impulse and the action. In that tiny, fleeting pause, you are practicing the liberation of the moment. You are choosing not to act from a place of fear. You are deciding that your worth is not dependent on the fullness of your net, but on the grace with which you inhabit your own uncaught reality. This is not weakness, it is a profound and sturdy strength. It is the wisdom of someone who knows that their identity is not a product of external snaring, but a natural, inherent quality of their own being. Consider the times you feel you must smile while your heart feels heavy. The times you perform strength because you are terrified that the hollowness in your boat might be visible. We are taught that to be together is to be seamless and perfectly maintained, with every emotional outcome captured and every uncertainty kept in its place. But look at the water of the lake, or the way the starlight shifts as the moon crosses the horizon. They do not hide their history, they inhabit it. They celebrate the texture of change. You can live your life with this same openness. You can care deeply about your relationships, your work, and your future without needing to trap every transition in a container of anxiety. You can be dedicated to your path without treating every minor detour like the end of your entire mission. When you stop trying to keep your life looking like a perfectly managed harvest, you finally discover that your ability to connect with others increases, because you are finally showing up as a person, not as a performance. The guilt that often arises when you try to rest the nagging voice that insists you haven't earned your stillness, because you haven't solved your current challenge, is just another layer of the dry, brittle silk you have been trying to force into a net for years. You believe that if you aren't busy casting, you are somehow behind. But you are not a fisherman meant to toil until you vanish. You are a human being, and your rest is as much a part of your unfolding as your ambition. When you lie down at the end of a long day, you are not failing to be productive. You are honoring the need for the lake of your existence to simply pass through your awareness. You are allowing the tension to dissipate naturally. You can rest without a justification. You can exist without a scorecard. You can be still without being ashamed of the space you occupy. Not every thought that enters your mind deserves an audience. Not every feeling that brushes against your heart is a command that you must follow. When you feel the familiar pull of self-comparison, comparing your current state to the perceived perfection of someone else's highlight reel, imagine that it is a small, passing ripple, a minor tremor in the current that does not need to be amplified by your own frantic attention. You can let it drift and vanish. You can watch it move through the water, like the light moving through the trees, without needing to rush for a net to keep the reality out. By not feeding the comparison, you are saving your energy for the things that actually matter. You are saving your presence for the people and the passions that deserve your most authentic, unmeasured self. This modern life is not a trap designed to keep you in a state of performance. It is a vast, resonant landscape, much like the one where the student sat with the teacher in the meadow, where the light will always shift, the water will always move, and the unexpected will always arrive. You cannot scrub away the realities of being human. You cannot force the world to be a perfectly clean, predictable channel, but you can change your relationship to the current. You can move from the exhausted, rigid weaver fighting the wind to the person who realizes the water is meant to hold the flow, not the fish. You can meet your life with a softness that is not brittle, with a patience that is not resigned, and with a courage that finally allows you to be simply present. Think of the moments where you have felt most alive, most connected, and most at peace. They rarely occur when you are gripping the silk ropes, or when you are tightly bound in the defensive straps of your own projections. They occur when you have let go. They occur in the small, unguarded moments, a laugh shared with a friend, a quiet walk in the evening air, the act of sitting with a piece of work and being content with the progress you have made, however imperfect it might be. These are the moments of your true nature. They are the times when you have finally stopped the casting and started the living. As you look toward the morning, remind yourself that you do not need to arrive with a new flawless achievement. You do not need to present a version of yourself that has been captured until it is unrecognizably trapped. You can arrive exactly as you are, a person with a history, a soul with depth, and a spirit that has finally learned how to trust the lake. The world needs the presence that only you can offer, and that presence is only possible when you are willing to exist without the tools. You are not a vessel that needs to be defended. You are a lake that is meant to be inhabited. And so, in the small decisions you make tomorrow, the way you speak to yourself when you err, the way you pause when you feel the pressure to produce, the way you allow yourself to be still when the world is rushing, remember the lake. Remember that your worth is not a product of your casting, but of your capacity to hold the stillness. You are doing the work of a lifetime by simply deciding to be a little kinder to your own empty hands. You are shifting the entire architecture of your inner world, moving from a boat of defensive effort to an open lake of lived experience. Every time you choose to leave the net on the bench, you are inviting the world to meet you. And every time you choose to listen to the rhythm of your own heart rather than the loop of your mind's demands, you are finally coming home to the one who has been waiting for this moment of grace all along. You have everything you need, and you have always been enough to be here. The stillness is not a danger anymore. It is the space where your life is finally permitted to bloom. And in the quiet of this night, as you let go of the last of the tension, you can feel the entire structure of your being loosening, deepening, and coming to rest. Finally free from the need to catch. Finally free from the need to perform. Finally free to just be the vast, peaceful presence of your own existence. Standing firmly on the dock, opening out into the great welcoming dark, the frantic labor of the weaver is finally finished. For a long time you have stood upon the wooden deck of your own life, the coarse, silk ropes of your expectation burning against your palms, the compulsion to cast your nets into the dark defining the rhythm of your days. But feel your hands now, lying open and motionless against the fabric of your bed. They are empty. And in that emptiness there is no failure, only a profound, long-awaited quiet. You do not need to snare the reflection of the starlight to prove the worth of your existence. You have finally laid the heavy, silken coils down upon the dock, letting the cool, damp wood take the burden, and the sound of the rope settling has been swallowed by the vast, open stillness of the lake's dark expanse. The water around you is deepening, cooling, and settling into the hollows of your body like a blanket of shadow. It is no longer a rival that demands a catch, but a presence that asks for nothing but your drifting. It is a refuge, a sheltered reach of the lake where you have been granted permission to stop the casting. The expanse remains, ancient and indifferent, but it no longer requires your harvest. The knots you spent so much time trying to tighten are loosening in the dim light, smoothing back into the natural, shifting stillness of the water. And you are finally free from the need to make your life a collection of trapped moments that refuse to move with the current. As you drift toward the edge of sleep, let the image of the net dissolve into the velvet dark. Imagine the starlight tracing the surface of the lake, not as points to be captured, but as pathways to be rested upon. The tension of your weaving is thinning. The rhythm of your breathing is the only rhythm that matters now, steady and unforced, a gentle tide rising and falling in the deep. Everything you were trying to secure, every version of your joy you were afraid would slip away, is held in the infinite, patient memory of the water itself. You are not a vessel that needs to be filled. You are a traveler who has reached the center of the lake, and the depths do not require you to keep hauling until the morning. Your breath is becoming a slow, effortless movement, drawing you further away from the need to snare, to define, or to possess. With every quiet exhalation, you are releasing the final remnants of that knotted, rope-burdened identity, letting it slip away into the soft, dark silt of the lake floor. Your muscles, which were once coiled for the throw, are unraveling into the comfort of the linens. You are becoming as fluid as the current, as smooth as the surface, and as unburdened as the air that wanders the shoreline, needing nothing, owning nothing, and perfectly at peace in the resonance of the dark. There is nothing left to snare. There is no reflection that must be captured before you close your eyes. Even if the memories of the silk come to visit, even if there are places where your palms still feel the phantom ache of the rope, know that these are not signs of your inadequacy. They are the marks of a human who has spent a long, long time trying to be more than a passing wave. You have done enough by simply choosing to sit still. You are allowed to be empty-handed. You are allowed to be uncaught, for you are held by the lake. Let the sounds of the night, the gentle rustle of the fabric, the soft, distant settling of the house be the only music in your sanctuary. You are not required to provide a harvest report. You are not required to be a testament to your own vigilance. You are not required to keep the ripples still with your own hunger. The architecture of your peace is built on a grace deeper than your own anxious effort, and that foundation is holding you perfectly, securely, right here, in this depth of rest. Your mind is like a deep, protected pool at the heart of the lake, the air cool, the shadows kind, the surface undisturbed by the frantic pace of the day you have finally left behind. Feel the deep, restorative warmth spreading through your body, from the top of your head to the tips of your toes. It is the warmth of finally being home, It is the warmth of realizing that you have been enough all along, even when you were so busy trying to trap yourself into something that could never be kept. You have stepped out of the role of the weaver, out of the role of the hunter, and back into the role of the water. And as the water, you are entitled to the rest that this deep lakeside stillness provides. You are entitled to the peace that this night offers, without any conditions, without any need to earn it through the labor of your lines. Everything that belongs to tomorrow will wait for tomorrow. Your projects, your aspirations, the harvest you are meant to seek. When the sun warms the shore, they are not going anywhere, and they do not need your mental presence tonight. You are free to let them drift into the periphery, to let them exist as mere suggestions rather than current commands. Your world is vast, contained, and entirely peaceful. It consists of the gentle rise of your chest, the touch of the pillow, and the quiet, steady rhythm of your own heart, which needs no net and no catch to be whole. As the last remnants of the day's labor fall away, recognize the gift of this wide, unsnared expanse. It is not an absence of purpose. It is the presence of your own true nature, beneath all the layers of weaving and all the habits of the hunt. It is the lake that is not defined by the fish. It is the starlight that is not defined by the reflection. It is you, in your most essential, quiet, and peaceful form, resting in the stillness of the night, finally at one with the water. Trust in the unfolding of the lake. Trust in the cycle that turns the day into the night and the weaving into sleep. You are part of that great unhurried rhythm, and you are exactly where the water has placed you. The net is set down, the silk is resting, the dock is still, and it waits in the moonlight, perfectly complete in its own beautiful, shifting, and honest way. What if the happiness you were trying so desperately to trap in a web was never a fish to be caught, but the very water that was holding you all along?